Welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're going down a pretty dark path, I think, as we explore the case of Jeffrey Mailhot,
Jeffrey Mailhot.
the so-called Rhode Island Ripper. And you've shared a Wikipedia article detailing his life, his crimes, his capture. And
Right.
wow, the more you kind of go down this rabbit hole, the more disturbing it gets.
Yeah, it's definitely a case that sticks with you. I think the thing that's immediately striking about Mailhot is just the stark contrast between, his outward appearance and the horrifying acts that he committed. He was a paper mill worker described as quiet and polite
Really?
by those who knew him. Yeah, no prior criminal record, nothing to suggest that he harbored, such darkness within him.
It's that like ordinary guy facade that I think makes it so
Exactly.
chilling, right?
Yeah.
It really does challenge our perception of evil, I think, and makes you wonder, are there just hidden monsters lurking among us?
Absolutely. And it's important to remember that, evil isn't always obvious. Sometimes it hides behind a mask of normalcy, which is why we can't rely on stereotypes or surface judgments. We have to go kind of beyond the facade to try to understand, the complexities of human behavior.
Okay, so let's unpack this a bit. So Mailhot murdered 3 women, all sex workers between 2003 and 2004.
Right.
He strangled them and then dismembered their bodies using a saw, disposing of the remains in garbage bags. Pretty horrific stuff.
Yeah, and that's where I think the case takes an even darker turn, is that only one victim's remains were ever found.
Oh, wow.
So you have the families of the other 2 victims who are left in this perpetual state of anguish and uncertainty. Imagine the pain of not knowing, the lack of closure, the lingering questions that may never be answered.
Just heartbreaking. And then there's this almost unbelievable detail. Mailhot confessed that he got the idea for dismembering his victims from watching an episode of The Sopranos.
The Sopranos, yeah.
I mean, is this just a bizarre coincidence, or could a TV show really push someone over the edge?
That's where we need to consider the concept of copycat crimes and the influence of media on criminal behavior.
Yeah.
There have been studies that show that exposure to violent content can desensitize individuals to violence and even inspire them to imitate what they've seen.
So in Mailhot's case, it's possible that watching that particular episode planted a seed,
Potentially.
however twisted in his mind.
It's a possibility we can't ignore, but I think it's also important to remember that correlation doesn't equal causation. So we can't definitively say that watching The Sopranos caused him to become a killer, but it does raise interesting questions about, the responsibility of media creators and the potential consequences of depicting violence, even in a fictional context.
Yeah. And this deep dive gets even more intense because one of Mailhot's potential victims, Jocelyn Martel,
Right.
actually managed to escape.
Yeah, this is a really remarkable part of the story. Martel fought back. She headbutted Mailhot and poked him in the eye, which allowed her to break free and run.
Wow. Talk about a close call.
Yeah.
That's the fight-or-flight response in action, right?
Exactly. The fight or flight response is a physiological reaction that kicks in when we perceive a threat. It's a survival mechanism that floods our bodies with adrenaline and prepares us to either confront the danger or flee from it.
But here's where it gets a little confusing for me, at least. Why didn't Martel report the attack to the police? It was actually an anonymous tip that eventually led to Mailhot's arrest.
That's an excellent question, and it kind of highlights the complexity of trauma. Survivors of violent crimes often respond in unpredictable ways. Fear, shame, a sense of disbelief can prevent them from coming forward. It's also possible that Martel was dealing with, psychological shock, which can impair, memory and decision-making.
So there's often more to the story than meets the eye, right? And in Mailhot's case, the story takes another turn with his arrest and confession. He was apprehended on the steps of his home in July 2004. And during interrogation, he admitted to the murders, even saying he was glad to be caught because he couldn't stop himself.
Yeah, his confession is really a fascinating piece of the puzzle.
Yeah.
And it raises more questions than answers. Was it a genuine expression of remorse? Was it a desperate attempt to shift blame? Or was it some sort of manipulation tactic designed to elicit sympathy?
So are we talking about a cold-blooded killer who knew what he was doing?
Right.
Or someone struggling with internal demons that he couldn't control?
Yeah, to understand that, I think we need to dig a little deeper into the psychology behind these horrific acts.
Let's do that. And for you listening, this is where it gets really interesting.
When we talk about seemingly normal people committing these horrific acts, we often find a cluster of personality traits known as the dark triad.
Okay.
And these traits are narcissism, Machiavellianism, and psychopathy.
Gotcha.
And they can exist in varying degrees within individuals, but in extreme cases, they can contribute to, a dangerous disregard for others.
So are you saying that Mailhot might have possessed some of these
It's
dark triad traits?
certainly possible. Narcissists have an inflated sense of self-importance and a lack of empathy,
Right.
while Machiavellians are manipulative and exploitative.
Okay.
Psychopaths, on the other hand, exhibit a lack of remorse, impulsivity, and a tendency towards antisocial behavior.
It's interesting to think about how these traits might have manifested in his seemingly ordinary life. Like, did anyone see warning signs? Did people think
Right.
something was off?
And that's the challenge with these personality traits, is that they can be very subtle
Oh, okay.
and often masked by a charming exterior. Someone with high levels of Machiavellianism, for example, might be very adept at blending in and manipulating others to get what they want,
So it's possible that he was living a double life,
potentially.
hiding his true nature from the world.
Precisely. And that brings us to another crucial aspect of this case, and that's the legal proceedings and the question of justice. So in 2006, Mailhot pleaded guilty to 3 counts of first-degree murder,
Wow.
1 count of assault with intent to commit murder, and 1 count of felony assault.
Can you break that down for, for those of us who aren't legal experts? What does all that mean?
Sure. So first-degree murder indicates that the killings were premeditated and intentional.
Okay.
Assault with intent to commit murder means that he intended to kill Jocelyn Martell,
Right.
but was unsuccessful.
Gotcha.
And felony assault refers to a violent attack that results in serious bodily harm.
So we're talking about very serious charges.
Absolutely.
With very serious consequences.
Yes.
What was the outcome of the trial?
So Mailhot was sentenced to 2 life terms plus 10 years. He's currently serving his time at the Rhode Island Maximum Security Prison in Cranston.
Okay, so 2 life sentences.
Right.
That sounds
sounds
pretty
so.
definitive.
It does, but there's a twist. Mailhot is actually eligible for parole in 2047.
Wait, what? He could actually be released.
That's right. He would be 77 years old at that time.
I don't know how I feel about that. On one hand, he committed horrific crimes, took 3 lives,
Right.
and caused immeasurable pain. But on the other hand, is there ever a point where someone could be considered rehabilitated, even after committing such acts?
Yeah, and that's the ethical dilemma, I think, at the heart of parole eligibility, is it forces us to grapple with this balance between punishment and the possibility of redemption. Some people believe that certain crimes are so heinous that the perpetrators should never be allowed back into society, regardless of how much time they serve or how much they may have changed.
Right, and then others would say that, everyone deserves a second chance. Even those who have committed terrible acts, everyone deserves a chance at rehabilitation and reintegration back into society.
Exactly. And this debate becomes even more complex when you consider the factors that might have contributed to the crime in the first place. Were there mitigating circumstances? Was mental illness a factor? These are all really difficult questions with no easy answers.
It's fascinating to think about all these different perspectives. Where do you stand on this personally?
As an expert, I strive to remain objective and focus on the facts and the research. However, I can say that this case raises many important questions about, our justice system,
Yeah.
the nature of punishment,
Yeah.
and the very concept of rehabilitation.
And for our listener, this deep dive is meant to be a starting point for further exploration.
Right.
It's about prompting you to think critically about these complex issues and perhaps even challenge your own assumptions.
That's precisely the goal. We want to spark your curiosity and encourage you to delve deeper into the psychology, the legal aspects, and the ethical dilemmas surrounding this case and others like it.
This case has certainly given me a lot to think about. It's disturbing on so many levels,
Yeah.
but it's also incredibly fascinating from a psychological perspective. It makes you wonder how someone can go from seemingly normal to committing such horrific acts.
And that's the question that continues to intrigue criminologists, psychologists, and researchers worldwide. What are the underlying factors, the triggers, the psychological processes that lead someone down such a dark path?
It's like trying to solve a puzzle with missing pieces. We may never fully understand what drove Jeffrey Mailhot to commit these crimes, but by examining the evidence, exploring the psychology, and engaging in open and honest discussions, we can hopefully shed some light on the darkness and work towards preventing
Absolutely.
such tragedies in the future.
And that's why cases like this, as difficult as they are to confront, are so important to study and discuss. They force us to confront uncomfortable truths about human nature and the complexities of our world.
This has been an incredibly insightful conversation, and I appreciate you sharing your expertise with us.
Oh, of course, it's been
Listener,
but my pleasure.
I think we've covered a lot of ground, but there's always more to explore.
Absolutely. And, I think one of the the most crucial takeaways from this deep dive is the importance of understanding the subtle signs of potential danger.
Yeah,
We've talked about the dark triad traits
right,
and how they can be masked by, charm and normalcy.
right.
But there are often red flags, subtle cues that might indicate that someone is struggling with these darker impulses.
So what should we be looking for? Like, what are some of those red flags?
Well, it's important to note that, these signs alone don't necessarily mean that someone is a danger to others.
Right.
But when you see a cluster of these behaviors, it might warrant caution.
Okay.
And further observation, things like a lack of empathy, a disregard for rules and boundaries,
Okay.
a history of manipulation or deceit, and a fascination with violence or control can all be potential warning signs.
It's like those puzzles where you have to spot the differences between two seemingly identical pictures.
Right.
You have to really pay attention to the details, the subtle discrepancies that reveal something deeper.
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
And just like with those puzzles, it takes practice and awareness to spot the red flags in real life.
Yeah.
But the more we educate ourselves about the psychology of these behaviors, the better equipped we are to protect ourselves and others.
And speaking of protection, this brings us back to Jocelyn Martel and her incredible escape. She fought back, she ran, and ultimately she survived. What can we learn from her experience?
Well, Martel's story is a powerful reminder that we are not powerless in the face of danger.
Right.
Sometimes fighting back is the best option.
Yeah.
And even if escape isn't immediately possible, there are strategies we can use to increase our chances of survival. Things like being aware of our surroundings,
Okay.
trusting our instincts, and having a plan in place can make a difference in a dangerous situation.
So it's not just about being reactive, it's about being proactive.
Exactly.
It's about empowering ourselves with knowledge and skills that can help us stay safe.
Precisely. And it's also important to remember that even in the aftermath of trauma, there is hope for healing and recovery.
Yeah.
Jocelyn Martel's resilience is a testament to the human spirit's ability to overcome even the most harrowing experiences.
So what does this all mean? Where do we go from here? We've explored the chilling details of Jeffrey Mailhot's crimes, delved into the psychology behind them, and grappled with the ethical dilemmas of punishment and rehabilitation. But what can we as individuals take away from this deep dive?
Well, I think the most important takeaway is the realization that evil can lurk in unexpected places.
Yeah.
It's not always obvious, it doesn't always fit our preconceived notions, and sometimes it hides behind a mask of normalcy.
Right.
But by understanding the psychology of these behaviors,
Yeah.
by recognizing the red flags, by empowering ourselves with knowledge and strategies for safety, we can navigate our world with greater awareness
Yeah.
and hopefully contribute to creating a safer society for everyone.
This deep dive has been incredibly insightful, but man, it's heavy stuff. It makes you question so much about human nature and the world we live in.
It is heavy stuff, but it's important stuff.
Yeah.
And sometimes facing those uncomfortable questions is the first step towards finding answers.
Well said. And to our listener, if this deep dive has sparked your curiosity, we encourage you to do your own research, read more about Jeffrey Mailhot, explore the psychology of serial killers, think critically about the media you consume and its potential influence. There's a wealth of information out there, and the more you learn, the better equipped you'll be to understand and navigate the complexities of our world.
Remember, knowledge is power. And by engaging in these conversations, by asking difficult questions, by seeking understanding, we can work towards creating a world where tragedies like this become less frequent and where the darkness has less power over us.
And with that thought-provoking message, we come to the end of another deep dive. Until next time, keep exploring, keep learning, and keep those critical thinking skills sharp.